Good afternoon, folks. We are on Southeast Tiger Mountain again, and we are looking at a unit of Douglas-fir that was harvested about 5 years ago, and or planted about 5 years ago, harvested 6 years ago. The Abney unit. We've looked at a couple other units. This sale had 6 units. We looked at the one down below off of Southeast Tiger by the neighbors that had bees, and where we didn't use vegetation control or site prep. And here is an example of a unit where we did use site prep, vegetation control, and you can see again the stark contrast between the amount of species of vegetation and the abundance of the species that are here. We have some big leaf maple clumps that are coming in and that we will treat eventually, probably next year. We've got some vine maple in here. Lots of grass too, because what ends up happening, the mix that we use, which is about 3 different chemicals, end up attacking a lot of more of the woody type species like the alder and the maple and blackberry, and you can see back there some butterfly bush that came in still. And hopefully that'll get treated when we do the big leaf maple treatment. But so the herbicides that we use typically will attack those type of species specifically and allow grasses to proliferate, which in many instances is good, because grasses help create a nice A horizon, because they're perennial, so they come back and they drop their leaves and seeds and everything every year, and they have a lot of root mass, and so they're breaking up the A horizon in the soil here and allowing a lot of microbial activity to come back into the soil and be protected by the sun and in the summer and the heat and the cold, basically the fluctuation of soil temperature, which is crucial to microbial activity. So these grasses are good. They don't really compete too much with our crop trees. The competition that we're more interested in reducing are the type of shrubs and trees and blackberry, which is invasive, and things like that are going to overtop the trees and cause a lot of competition for sunlight, and then also water and nutrients below ground. Here you can see the application of our veg control or our site prep worked really well. We do have a lot of ribes sanguineum. There's one still blooming right there, the blood currant, and so that's a plant obviously not too badly affected by the type of mix of herbicide that we use. You can see the trees in here are at least 6 to 8 feet tall on average, I would say, whereas the trees where we were looking at before below, where we didn't use veg control, those trees were 4 to 6 feet tall. So these are 2 to 3 feet taller on average, and they've got wider crowns, more robust growth. The leaders on these trees are some of them are at least 2 feet, if not 3 feet, and these trees are really starting to establish, and I'm sure the microbial balance is starting to to get, you know, the microbes are starting to get back into balance after the disturbance of the logging, except of course around the piled areas where you're going to have too much carbon input, and those will be kind of, you know, typically an area where tree growth will not do so well, like I've mentioned in the past. And also you kind of invite some invasive species to take over there as well. A lot of piles end up getting covered in blackberry over time, and you know, but piles also are good places for certain critters to live as well, like rodents and rabbits, and bear have even been known to build dens in some of these piles as well. So you know, everything has a good and a bad side to it, and that's something you have to really keep in mind in this industry, is that you know, you can't just say one thing is completely bad or one thing is completely good. Just about any time, everything has two sides to it. So that's the beauty, the paradox, the complexity of forest management, which is one of the reasons why I enjoy the job so much. If we had a clear day and those clouds weren't there, just past that maple that was left from the harvest, you'd be able to see Mount Rainier too. There's a really good view of Mount Rainier here. Unfortunately, you can't see it today, but if you ever come up here on a clear day, this is a great spot to see Mount Rainier view. Okie dokie, we're walked up a little bit of a trail where at the top end of this unit now. We parked back down there by the road, walked up the trail here, and I want to point out we buffered off of this trail. This trail was pre-existing. It's used by a lot of equestrians actually. It was pre-existing before we cut the sail. Then when we came in and we did site prep, we buffered 25-30 feet off of the trail with our vegetation control, our site prep herbicide usage, called many different things. And so here is kind of a good example of, you can see a lot of trailing blackberry, which isn't too bad necessarily for Douglas-fir tree. They can become issues. You see how they crawl up over the bottom limbs here. They can pull those down, cause those to be less helpful for the tree, for photosynthesis, so forth, if they end up dying. You see a lot of snowberry in there, Symphocarpus albus, or corpseberry it's also known as. And you can see the vegetation is you know, 3-4 feet high in there, and these trees are maybe 6 feet tall, and they're struggling a little bit here. They're not quite as robust as the trees in here. And you see in here, besides this big leaf maple, which again I said we're going to come in here and treat separately with a thin line treatment by hand to knock that down. But you can definitely see, at least I can, the difference here in vegetation, amount of understory vegetation. And if you see here, this is another good example, because we're off the trail now. The trail's back in there, goes into the trees and back into the forest. And here we are at the boundary of the timber sale, the uppermost boundary, and this is what the vegetation was like prior and without any vegetation control. We have 10-foot tall salmonberry, we have elderberry that's 12 feet tall, and now we have a 20-foot tall or a 15-foot tall alder. And then we get grass and a little bit of trailing blackberry, a couple little alders, couple little bracken fern coming in here. But these Douglas-fir are 10 feet tall or more, very healthy top leaders, lots of growth happening here. And again, because we've done site prep to control the vegetation here. This is what, on my right, basically, the salmonberry and everything in here would be basically in here if we hadn't used site prep, and the trees would be a third the size they are and not as healthy. So a lot of people, and even myself, when I first started working in forest management, in particular logging, was against kind of or very skeptical of vegetation control, but I have seen it used in responsible ways, and I've seen it target certain species types or certain you know, vegetation types by attacking the woody species and so forth. And especially, and then I've seen the vegetation come back, you know, after a few years. And so after that experience, for me, I see it as a great tool for forestry, for growing crop trees like Douglas-fir, hemlock, and cedar that you want to establish and do a really good job of getting kind of establishment, making those connections in the soil with the microbial community, especially the fungi, and how if allowed to, this vegetation here, if that was not controlled by the herbicide, it would be in here. This tree would be overtopped, and these trees would be overtopped, and it would look like more like this here, with you just being able to see the top 3 feet of the Douglas-fir tree. Another thing I want to point out here real quick is big leaf maple. I think I may have mentioned in past talks about how it's such a water sink. It sucks up so much water and holds on to so much water. And that's why we try to control it as much as possible, because it's definitely sucking up the water that these young Douglas-fir, cedar, and hemlock need in order to become a healthy forest, especially in the beginning. And again, there will end up being some maple in here. In fact, we left a lot of maple as leave trees in this unit here in particular, because there was already a lot of maple existing in here. And so we'll continue to get maple in here. It's not like we're going to eradicate it, but a clump of maple like this can end up affecting up to 1/10 of an acre of crop trees. And so if you can imagine, you know, 1/10 of an acre, if you have 10 clumps in an acre, right, then you're going to lose, you could potentially lose that whole acre, you know, to big leaf maple, as long as they're spread out evenly. I guess that would also be a factor. But, you know, we're not making guitars either. You know, we're here growing structural dimensional lumber to build homes with. And that's what Douglas-fir and cedar and hemlock are good for. And so, like I said, just like the understory, the maple will continue to grow. There will be a mature maple in here when we come in and harvest in 40, 50, 60 years from now. So we're just, I guess, giving preferential treatment to the Douglas-fir, cedar, and hemlock. That's one way to look at it.